I have to say that I've challenged the program to have this session because I've been facing with lots of companies that are starting and lots of entrepreneurs, most of them from the with a technology background, but after having a great idea, they are not fully able to develop it, market it, and capture the value. And one of the things that is paramount in what is called innovation is exactly creating value. So what I want to start with, let me try to share my screen. Is with some slides from or a diagram from Strategizer. Let me see if I can share this screen only for inspiration. The idea is not to use it without thinking, but it's a way to inspire you. Can you see my screen?
No.
Let me check. Share screen. Yeah, this one. Share. And now,
Yes, we can see your screen.
okay. So what is in when we have an idea and we try ourselves to formulate it and describe everything. Sometimes we are not able to create the necessary value at the end because we are not looking for uh, from the customer's perspective. But also, and it's being even more complex, more complex. It's not only customers that matter; other stakeholders are equally important when we design a product, and those stakeholders can be for instance, I'll give an example of high city solutions to work with elderly persons. Sometimes the elders are the customer, but most of the times they are not the customer. They are end users, and they need to, and the solution must must target their needs, allow them to do their job in an easiest way, in a more friendly with a more friendly interface. Another example, I'm mentoring a program related to media, and what the startup working with is trying to launch a format for cross media. And one of the first things the CEO asked me was, "Can you introduce me to broadcasters?" Broadcasters are not the customers; in fact, they are seen as suppliers of content. And I said, "Okay, I know some of them, high level contacts, but what do you have to offer to them? So, what is your value proposition for these stakeholders?" And most of the time, in this case, he's still thinking, on what can I say to those stakeholders to engage them in sharing their content. So that's why I think that value proposition is a very good start during the design phase or development phase of the product. But not only thinking on customers, they are really key part, but also thinking on all the partners that we really need to have on board to make it a success. Most of the social media, for instance, now we are not customers of Facebook, but if we are not in the network, the customers of Facebook cannot have the audience they need to share the products. It's an advertising model. So if you don't have users engage with a solution, you don't have customers. So that's why it's sometimes it's important to think on what are we delivering to all these stakeholders uh, across the value chain, and also how it's important to tackle their needs, their pains, and the tasks they have to fulfill. So most of you probably use business model canvas to design your business models, but there are two parts: the customer segments and the developer position itself that have been further developed in another edition of Strategizer books. The one is on the right is the customer profile, and I would say it shouldn't be the customer profile, but each of the stakeholders profile. In this case, it can be all, of course, customers are one, but it can be partners. For instance, in smart cities, cities try to engage citizens in the process, but and cities are the customer. But each citizen has a need, has a pain, and needs to be helped by the solution. So it's important to identify first all the stakeholders, and then define what they need as a requirement. So the customer jobs, what are the gains the solution can give to them, and that what are the most important pains they suffer. So what are the difficulties that our product needs to solve, and then with that we can specify our solution based on what can create gains to the stakeholder, not the customer, what can be a relief, can relieve their pains, so address the difficulties and try to make it easier in the daily routine, and also what at the end what is the product of service that we need to have. So this is an approach that it's important to tackle for each of the stakeholders and as early as possible. And this will help us in doing another thing, that is trying to engage using users during the development stage. Also, user co-creation or stakeholder co-creation is also very important to have a successful product. And I think this is a quite important message, especially for companies working with technology. I'm a person that has a technology background, but I've learned while developing R&D projects that if I don't have users involved in the process, at the end I'll have a product that fits me but doesn't fit the customer or the stakeholders. And that's probably the most important thing we need to realize when developing a product, is that we need to please not only the customers, providing them value directly, but also all the important stakeholders for that product. Either they are funding, or they need, or they are the raw materials, like we are in Facebook. We are selling ourselves to Facebook, so Facebook has to please us on that. So they have to give us an experience that that makes us return and return to it, so we can consume ads from the customers they have. So this is a quite interesting topic, and I think Jerry has has some tools to propose in these two scenarios to develop the developer position, and also and engage stakeholders and define the what should be the products. Isn't that, Jerry?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to pick up on that?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jerry. I'm a freelancer. I'm a consultant. I'm a speaker, and I help companies. I challenge companies. I ask questions of companies. And I'm in the Blockpool program as a mentor for one of the startups. If you're there, hi Ecclesia, nice people. And the way I rolled into blockchain was out of pure interest, but what I learned, what my added value was more about, on the one side, I'm extremely interested by innovation and challenging the status quo, but I'm also getting old enough to understand the value of common sense and the fundamentals. And one of the fundamentals, as you point out, Pedro, is people. So me and a friend in Berlin did a study with Berlin blockchain startups last year, I think it was, about the innovation methodologies that they use. And there was a big discrepancy between, on the one side, them...
Yeah, Pedro, sorry for interrupting. We are seeing your screen and you're sharing the Zoom participants.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. That was my idea.
Stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to find the button for
Sorry,
that.
Jerry, you can continue.
So yeah, what we did with that inquiry in Berlin startup scene was we saw a discrepancy between, on the one side, the startups describing their unique selling proposition a lot about trust, and on the other side, there was a lack of using sort of trusted innovation methodologies. And so we started, my friend Renzo and I started working on sort of blockchain tools or tools for blockchain thinking, and tried to keep them as simple as possible, because obviously startups were working a lot on their technical development or on their legal development, because that were the two big hurdles for them to go to market. And we figured out that there was a sort of an opportunity to also make them think about user centricity or design thinking or all those kind of things. So I've had the pleasure to work with some kind of startups, and also with, for instance, the Flemish Education Agency, on discovering good use cases and then testing them. So I'll share a few things of what I think could potentially help, of what I've used a few times to help startups define basically what their added value is, as Pedro said. Because I think, and the business canvas and the value proposition canvas, as they've been developed over the last decennia, are very useful. But there is that one single thing that's slightly different in blockchain, which is a lot about trust. But trust is not a binary thing, right? It's sort of more of a sliding, vague scale of what this means. So I've tried to develop a very simple tool. Again, I'm not an academic, but a very simple tool of what helps sometimes people find opportunity areas and then identify areas that you can go and test. So one is a thing called value mapping, which I've kind of devised or stolen together from all kinds of other tools. But the idea is, how do you sort of map how the value of your service or product is created? And it's a very simple tool that ends up looking like this, right? Typical, lots of lines and post-its. But I'll give you a simple version and then see for the startups if this could be useful for you at all. But I once simplified it on the value chain of a digital media campaign, for instance, to create a digital, a banner, for instance, very simple thing. But as Pedro already pointed out, there's lots of stakeholders involved in that. And what we do in these kind of exercises is try to figure out these questions. I'll show them to you. Who's involved? So what are the different roles? What do they actually do? And what value do they add? And value could be information or money or something, or a product or something like that. And you'll get this kind of sort of oversimplified or an archetypical value chain creation map of who adds what. So I won't talk you through completely, but the idea, for instance, to get from a marketing director at, for instance, a big brand like Nike to deliver a digital marketing ad onto your screen on a website, there's all these kind of stakeholders involved, from the production company to a designer for that thing to a media agency. And identifying these stakeholders is one thing, and then you identify the value that they add. So for instance, say lesoir.be, which is a website here in Belgium, what the value that they add is they give access to the Nike. They have an audience that comes there. Or for instance, at the end of the scale is that there's the freelance designer, for instance. The value that they add is they come up with an idea or they create a piece of content. And that's easy. Most companies tend to do that quite quickly. But then the big question I've noticed works really well is this one. Now start drawing lines, but who is frustrated with who or what? Or where, if you take away some lines, where would there be trust problems? And if you do that, you start creating this kind of what I call opportunity areas of where trust is actually implicitly present. And it can give startups an idea. This is quite often used in idea generation or in use case development to see where you go, oh, if we focus on that area, then we fix that problem. Because the value proposition canvas, as you said, Pedro, is about identifying what problem do you actually fix for what user. But trust is a weird problem. So I've noticed sometimes that it doesn't always solve this immediately, but you get discussions going on how these kind of frustration lines are, you make them more explicit and you can start working on that. For instance, on one product, one tool one project that we used this tool on was for the Flemish Education Agency, where we wanted to optimize all kinds of digital processes. But by doing this exercise, we figured out there was one particular area that could work on improvement about trust between a teacher and a school principal about contract issues and how that information flowed from one area to another. And then we saw opportunities about how we could maybe fix something like that with smart contracts. And that was one thing. And then I've learned idea generation is quite good, but then there's that whole point of are people going to use it or not? So I'm not a techie myself. I love technology. I love people who can build technology as well, but we have the tendency as people to have a single track psychological bias to what we know or what we think is right. That's normal. That's baked into who we are. And I'm not dissing the techies here, but techies have that particularly about thinking about their technology because they're problem solvers. The only thing that we need to learn as startups and blockchain community is the problem that we think we're fixing, is that a real problem? And there are all kinds of canvases for it, but I like to keep things simple. I've noticed this as a really simple question that people can do either with a facilitator or on their own, is list these kind of questions. Hell yeah, me, I'm a projected client or a customer or a user. I'll use your app or your service because I'll see this benefit. And in a small team, you can easily come up with a bunch of benefits. But then also challenge yourself and position yourself in the mind and the position and the environment of a potential client and be critical about, no, I'm not going to use it because, and identify hurdles. And what we did with our startup here in the Blockpool community was also just by doing this exercise for literally 30 minutes, we started working on what we call assumption mapping, which is a known innovation technology or methodology which answers the following questions. In order for our product or our app to be successful, we make this assumption and list the assumptions according to very critical, they need to be correct or not, and then you can go and test them. And with testing them, we mean, yes, maybe with minimal viable product demos, but also by talking to users and testing stuff and asking them. Because what I've learned throughout especially the last 10 years of my career is that people are not functional, rational beings. They are emotional and they are social beings. And trying to unlock that is really important to try to figure out the real nail that you're hitting on as a startup, or what problem that you're really, really fixing. And I'll give one example to close off. Is that for the startup we were working, the startup Ecclesia, we're working on a voting app that is integrated into a governance tool for communities, small communities in like eco real estate areas. And the assumption is that we want that voting to be private. But by doing this kind of exercise, we started questioning that. Like, actually, we know that in political voting, privacy is really important, but in community voting, is it as well? I mean, we should test that. We should not just test the technicalities, because I'm sure with, the guys, the team is technically really, really good, and they'll figure out, or they've already figured out a way to do the privacy on a blockchain, but technically. But will people use it? And is privacy not something that has also like a sliding scale? So again, then what Pedro said as well, trying to do that as early as possible in your process will minimize the risk of making bigger mistakes or technical mistakes later on. And quite often the technology, and I mark my words carefully, the technology we use for that is asking questions and listening to people. So that's also a really understated tool for trying to get to the real issue that you're solving for your clients. I'll leave it at that for now. I'll pick up on any questions later. Pedro.
Okay, Jerry. So as you see, it's important to understand all the value chain of the solution. And sometimes we, when we have the techie hats, are focusing more on the solution itself, on the technical challenge, than on the stakeholder challenges and pains. So after Jerry, I think Yasmer can also bring some some insights to our panel, especially because it's have very good reflections on what blockchain can bring to business models, and especially to business model design in emerging venture. Can you follow on that, Yashar?
Hi. Yes, of course, Pedro. Thank you for giving the word to me. I think before I do anything, I think for us to be able to think clearly about product market fit or the value proposition of any idea or any company, any project, I think we need to understand the business model. And I'm not going to give a lecture or any kind of background on what business models are. What I'm going to do is just say what I understand business models are. And to my understanding, business models are basically a set of activities. You have resources, capabilities that are held within the boundaries of the company or across the boundaries, mainly within the boundary of the company that are the ones that are manageable and people can really work on ironing them out. And these capabilities, resources, activities would allow the company to create value and appropriate all of the value that it created or some of it for themselves. Appropriate some of the value for the stakeholders and some for themselves. Well, the goal of any company is to create value for themselves in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So it is obviously very important to understand how to configure, design, and use technologies in our case, the blockchain technology in unique ways. That permeate through the activities, resources, and capabilities of different companies. And I also think that it is important to take the basic underpinnings of the blockchain technology in how value can be communicated. Jerry mentioned trust as kind of this selling point of blockchain. I would like to expand that perspective by adding to trust, for instance, the infrastructure costs that blockchain technology would help reduce, the human resources needed because of the automation that blockchain provides. The decentralization is very important for some people, mostly with the ideological predispositions, and governance mechanisms is another one. And you know that kind of many of Bitcoin's basic applications, for instance, time stamping and cryptography, existed years before 2008. And what Bitcoin did was basically reconfigure existing technologies and ideas into a new package, and they latched onto this ideological kind of adversarism of people who suffered from the 2008 financial crisis. And they managed to create a new paradigm and new ways of solving problems. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there is a need to link the benefits of blockchain to the overall strategy and capabilities of the company in order to kind of really create value. I think it is possible to go a long way that by really considering three main aspects of uniqueness. So the first one would be a coherent overarching strategy. Of course, every company has to have it. The capabilities that blockchain brings, both for the focal company and also for the external stakeholders. And then the third one is the particular problems that it can help solve for the company as well as for the stakeholders of the company. I'm going to share a slide with you. It's only one slide, and can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. So I think you could claim that to simplify things, right? So there are three key questions to ask. And just to sidebar it, I don't imply that these are the questions or claim comprehensiveness of these questions. But in my view, answering these three questions is paramount in creating a sort of focus in the operations of the company. So I guess many of you would agree that, among other things, blockchain solves problems such as recording, tracking, verification, aggregation, coordination, and you could come up with a list of other problems that it can solve. And what the value of each of these, let's say, actions would provide for the stakeholders and the company itself. Is it about the conversion of information to knowledge? Is it about provenance? Is it about attribution or responsibility? Does it have to do with granting access or permission, or who can vote or participate in decision processes? Is it about trust or curated reputation, for instance? Is it about contracts, transactions, and so on? And then kind of mapping what is the value which is created by way of what function to whom. And by mapping the kind of these connections, the company would be able to kind of bring a little bit more clarity into the processes. This is a framework that I have used while kind of coaching blockchain startups, but not only blockchain startups, but also the other types of startups that I have coached throughout the years. And it really kind of, it gives a very good starting point for entrepreneurs, for startups, as opposed to just giving them the business model canvas or the value proposition canvas that could be really overwhelming at times for people who don't really have the background in understanding these components. But this is, for, in my understanding, it's simple enough to really kind of put the feet down and trying to start kind of really understanding the problem that they're solving, for whom they're solving, and how they want to capture the value by solving that problem.
Okay, yes, sir. Okay, yes, sir. Just to clear, I use the developer position canvas only to frame the discussion of what is value, what are the needs, and what are the pains and gains of our customers or our stakeholders. I don't use it quite often, but for trying to change our state of mind or our preoccupations, it's also useful at the beginning, but it may end up not being filling all the blanks in the developer position model, but follow some of more specific tools like the ones you have described and used. So it's important is to focus on the customer and all the stakeholders that are relevant in the process. But if we
just respond, I was not referring to the value proposition framework
yeah,
that you shared. It was more on a general level.
yeah. But I have to say that I only use it, and that's why I was not so preoccupied with seeing all the texts in the chart. It's a way of arranging some thoughts, of going to a room with some colleagues and some potential customers or stakeholders, and let's try to figure out what this what this solution we are thinking can in fact be. And it's a way of anybody knows business model covers nowadays, and this is a way to go deeper. It doesn't need to be this way. And when we introduce blockchain, like Jerry and you said, we have other dimensions that need to be covered. But first of all, we need to think what can bring value to the whole stakeholders. All three of us were concerned mostly with the initial stages of the innovation value chain or innovation chain, from ideation to development. But what Valerio can bring to the discussion is exactly how to not create, but how to deliver the value and bring and change an idea or make an idea to be innovation itself.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you. There is maybe a question from Jerry first.
Yeah, very briefly, Yashar. in your experience as a coach, I mean, there's a bunch of startups here who try to be as pragmatic as possible. In your experience as a coach, can startups or small companies do these kind of exercises on their own? Or do they need some kind of guidance from a coach or a facilitator, in your experience?
I'll give you, I'll answer your question in this way. I have done research on incubators and accelerators myself, and I published papers on them. And one of the reasons that motivated me to kind of present today this smaller version of a framework was the point that I shared previously, that the business model canvas in and of itself is pretty intimidating and overwhelming. And it's really difficult for a lot of people to really figure out, okay, like I need to do interviews with customers, and how am I supposed to do it, right? What does it mean to interview people? I've done it for kind of for my job, and it's really difficult. You don't really know what questions are the best questions to ask most of the time, even if you spend days in creating a question manuscript, right? So my shorter answer to your question is that I think the business model canvas itself, I don't think is manageable for people who don't have experience in kind of having done it together with other people, or somebody had told them how this has to be taken care of. But I think that the smaller version that I shared, I think that should be that should be much more manageable. I presume, but generally, no. I have doubts about the kind of the usefulness of that framework as a standalone tool for entrepreneurs. There needs to be some sort of assistant, in my experience, and based on my research.
I can also add my experience, and most of the times we are not able to think on by ourselves on an object we are part of. But some companies have those people that are used to these kind of exercises. Even people from the technology domain some of them have evolved to think on user experience, on what are the needs of the user. So it will depend a lot on the company. But if we are talking about the startup, usually tech-driven, I think they need some. They will always need some support. They are too focused on solving a problem without knowing the problem sometimes. So someone from outside, even if it doesn't understand really what the solution needs to do, can help to the team to organize the ideas and try to identify key points they need to address during development, but also the stakeholders they need to invite to those reflections. At some time, this kind of reflections about what is the value for each of the stakeholders needs to be discussed with them directly. So I think we have it. It will depend a lot on who is leading the company, on the experience of the team. But if we are only techie and we cannot understand things like, if I don't provide a good interface to the end user, it won't use it. So we try to, but it's all there. Yeah, but it's all there, following your reason or your logic of thought, not the way customers do it. And personally, I've learned that quite early, because I was trying to implement software systems for the state when I was 17, 18 years old. And what I realized is that being part of the organization, interacting with all those stakeholders, made the difference between my solution to be used or not. So it will depend a lot on the people, but usually if we are too techy, we are too focused on a problem that we don't even know what it is, because we want to tackle a technological challenge too first, and sometimes that's not the best approach to it. I don't know if you have to want to add something on this, Jerry. And of course, all the participants, all the attendees can make some questions during using the Q&A anytime. Jerry, do you want to add something or?
No, I think I pretty much agree with that. So I'm okay.
Okay, Valerio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So last part. So we created a journey here. We started from stakeholders, we went to trust, we saw business models. Now what companies are asking me all the time is how do I go to my customers and how I build that trust that Jerry was saying, but just by going there and show my product, or how do I show my business model. So I'm Valerio. I'm generally in life an investor. I own an investor company. I'm also the head of product management for a big multinational, a Swiss big multinational, and I coach a lot of companies. I coach a lot of startups. And what I've seen is that how do I go to the market? How do I go with my marketing campaign? Is it something that I should go and do by myself, meet the people, or I should go through digital channels? Should I go with Facebook? Should I go with Twitter? Should I go with LinkedIn? This is a very important question. But I give you a little bit of truth, and then I will share some slides, but a little bit of truth here. Here we are speaking about technology. We are speaking about blockchain, and the people in this room and this building probably knows what is blockchain, what is the technologies that we are developing. But in the outside world, half of the people don't even understand what does it mean blockchain. So when we present our products, when we present our companies, we don't have to be too much technological, too much in detail, because they will not get it. All the companies, all the ideas, all the brilliant technology that all of you, all the startups are building are very good. I'm not saying they are not, they are very good. But if you go inside of my company where I work today, or if you go and talk with somebody else outside, an investor, they don't get it. They don't know. They might grasp a little bit the concept, but they don't know what does it mean. So let me share some slides and go a little bit in detail there, and tell me if you can see my screen, if you can do it. Tell me when it's ready. It's ready. Okay, very good, very good. So where do we start? Companies are asking me, inbound or outbound marketing, and what those are. So on one side, we have what is new. Now it's not anymore new. It's 10 years now that companies are pushing for digital campaigns. Let's go with social. Let's go with nice picture in Pinterest. Let's go with tweet every 2 hours, 3 hours. On the other side, we have outbound people that use the old style. I want to meet the customer. I want to create a letter and send a letter. I want to build up an event around it and go and meet customers there. So what I generally say is we don't have to choose one or the other, but the first thing that we need to do is research and ask ourselves, how do I want to engage my stakeholders, and how, as Jerry said, I want to build my trust. Because depending on the strategy I choose, one or the other, I need to build a history around it, and the history is related to the trust that the customer can have in my solution, or the stakeholders can have in my solution. Second, consideration and comparison. Where do I invest more money? where I get the best outcome of one or the other. It's not always the same. It can be one or the other, but it's not always the same. And the third step is purchase. It's time to decide and go for it. Okay. Here I wrote a little bit of difference between inbound and outbound marketing. Inbound generally are seen as high quality, high conversion system that is quick, but it takes a little bit of time to build it. How much do you have to spend in online marketing before you get actually some results? And on the other side is how, but it's fast. Let's say it's a little bit faster. How do I do the outbound part? Because I have lower conversion rate. I have to spend a lot of time in searching the right contact point inside of the company or the right people I want to sell my product. So where, sorry, click the wrong one. Okay. So where do I go? Where I stand? Well, depends on the product that you have and the message that you want to pass. If you want to create leads, then you go with outbound marketing. If you want to create contacts, get the leads, have conversion, because your product is an online platform, for example, it's not something physical, it's not something that you really need a piece of hardware, then you can go with inbound marketing. But where the magic happens, where I always say one or the other, no, we need to have both. We need to have both because not one strategy or the other is the right one. If I want to have, as a customer, I'm a company, not an end user, final user, a person that is around, but I'm a company that can be stakeholders, but I can be as well a final user of my solution. For example, if I'm selling something, or if I give the customers a platform that can use, I need to build up a little bit of both, because on one side I will find a lot of companies that I cannot reach by myself. If I want to sell something in the USA, I cannot physically go in the USA 3 months. I need to use the marketing. But if I can merge it with something that is more direct and is more events and personal, then I should create it. So, simple answer, and then open to question to all of you. Where do I stand to build this type of strategy, and where do I go with my marketing and way to approach my customers? The answer to me is analyze everything, then make a mix of the two, taking the best channels that are coming out from each of the two. So I'm giving back for questions. It was quite quick, but I just wanted to give a little bit of idea here on how to discuss on top of what we did all together.
Okay, so thank you, Valerio. Let's wait for some questions from the audience, but now we already have 3. One of them is not really a question, is a remark or a suggestion. So Miesco says that in his opinion, Lean Canvas is a better match for startups than the business canvas. My answer is you should use what the framework you feel more comfortable in using it. And sometimes we are not comfortable to use Lean or business model canvas, but we develop our own frameworks, our own methods along our time, our life, our experience. So this, if you use one or the other, the one that fits better to you, in my opinion, is the one that you should use. I don't know what my partners at the panel think on that, but can you share? Maybe Jerry first, and then Yashar.
Yeah, I think thanks, Misko, for pointing other people to the Lean Canvas. Yes, it's good. It is quite, as you say, sometimes more suitable for startups. But as Pedro said, if you're not comfortable with a certain framework, you find it too complicated, as Yashar has already pointed out, simplify it and make a step, not the step, because it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, yeah, sir. What do you think?
So my response is that I think those two frameworks are essentially the same. They have different taglines for each of the components. They have the same objective. They point you to the same direction, essentially, and it's just a matter of kind of frame of mind. So, so let's say the component of, so here you have, let's say, unfair advantage. I don't recall from my memory what's in the business model canvas, the equivalent of that component. It's on the right corner next to customer segment. From what I kind of understand, it's just more of the wording rather than the content of what you need to figure out for the continuation of your startup activities. And if you feel that some of them are jargon-like in the value proposition, in the business model canvas, which is developed by some guys who are into systems thinking, so they had a particular tradition that they just brought into the framework. And this is something which is done by mostly practitioners and kind of the terminologies that they use in practice. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is better than the other or which one is would be more helpful. I think, as Pedro and Jerry pointed out, just take the one that is easier for you to work with.
And you, Valerio, what do you think?
You're muted, Valerio.
Okay, totally agree with Yasser and Jerry. So 1 second. Sorry. So I totally agree with Jerry and Yashar, and I think that our startups that need to go with the business model or with the canvas really need to create and think what are the different parts that they need to put inside of that tool. The tool is very, very useful. The tool is very important because give perspective, give ideas, and give the way to build up a lot of visualizations and a good idea making. So by building that, then and that the one of Miesco shared is a good one. There are tons of others where you have different type of addition that can be done. It gives the solutions, but gives us also the problem, because if you write something, you can understand. I didn't take in consideration this point. How do I solve it? Or how our stakeholders or our customers at the end might face or might consider this a problem. And then to see that, I can find a solution.
Okay. Luis also shared a thought and is doing, he asked us for suggestions about, okay, he says that value proposition maps and value chain flows are a snapshot of a situation and they are static. So how can we address this ever-changing dynamic environment in our markets? Yeah, they are a snapshot, but I think more than a snapshot, they are a starting point for a reflection, and not really. They are not the finished work, because all the solution itself will be the finished work. But you can use whatever tool you want. For instance, it's quite common now to use agile methodologies during development. So you have a starting point for your backlog, and then you can evolve it with the customers or stakeholders that you have in your team during meetings and so on. It's just to frame a little bit your thoughts at an initial stage and try to figure out what are the challenges you have really to solve, what is the path, the roadmap for the development, and then the development process itself will lead you, if you have the engaged customers and stakeholders with you in your team, will lead you to evolve it. And this is a starting point. Then you have to write it, have requirements or to-dos, depending on what is the methodology you are following for to develop the solution. But once more, it's on you. I don't. This is my own opinion, but my colleagues, anyone wants to comment?
I actually would like to hear a little bit more about the problem that is, or the question which is asked, because that sounds a little bit kind of interesting for me, that your market as well as customers would change so dynamically. And I think without really having that understanding of what that customer is and what that market is, it's really difficult to answer that question. It could be the case that they're still confused. They haven't really figured out who the customers are, and kind of what market is it that they're targeting. But of course, as I mentioned in my slide, that it's something, these are the questions that you have to ask yourself over and over and over again before you get to a point that, I don't like the jargon, but you get to the product market fit. The time that you know your customers, there are these customers, there is this product that you spend time on creating, and this is the value that this product creates for your customers. So would you care to share with us a little bit about the problem that you raised, Luis Ma, if I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, I had the same feeling. So Luis at Stacks, if you can elaborate a little bit, that'd be great. I had the same feeling. If your target market changes too much in the beginning, I guess, while figuring out what your value proposition is, then it's a way of assuming, testing, validating, changing if necessary. But at some point, it can't change all the time, because then your value proposition or your value flow, whatever you want to call it, is probably not good enough, or not. You haven't dug deep enough. Maybe what's helped me sometimes with clients is to dig into the job to be done methodology by Clayton Christensen, a professor at, I think it was Harvard or whatever, but he's done this job to be done methodology, which has really helped me convince clients to take that one step deeper in figuring out what you're actually solving. If you Google it or YouTube it, it's got a really silly video on what the value proposition of a milkshake actually is. And it's really opened my mind into just dig that level slightly deeper beyond purely functional. And without spoiling it, a milkshake is not just something to give you or feed you or give you or fix your thirst. It's something more, there's something more companionship almost element to it in that sense. And by thinking in that way, you'll dig to a value proposition or a value flow that is probably more correct or more closer to product market fit, as Yashar calls it, than by staying at the superficial level. And in that sense, once you dug into that deeper level, the chances of it constantly changing just decrease, or should decrease.
Yeah, that helps. If you have and if you find initially find the customer and his needs or his problems or what he wants to use, and you start from that value proposition, and then you perform your development cycle with the customer with you, or with some customers with you. Of course, it won't change that much in the market perspective, but sometimes customers realize during development that they need different things, and that's why agile methodologies were created, because we never know the full requirements of a product before starting doing it. So having customers on board is important for that too, but it completely depends if you are selling your time or if you are developing and investing yourself. So you should focus on being fast to deliver at least a product to be tested by general audience, I think. But of course, Luis, you may further detail what your thoughts are, to one of us try to figure out what if you are in the right mindset or if you are still looking for the customers in the market. Because without identifying the potential customers and the potential stakeholders at the beginning, you cannot engage in a agile methodology, because you don't have the customer on board. So, and the last questions, I think Yashar and Jerry are the right ones to answer to these. What are the specifics of mentoring a blockchain startup in comparison with other startups? And I think Jerry said or explored some of the topics, and Yashar too. So,
Yashar, you go first. You go first. I'll add to that.
Or I can go first.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I think the difference, what I see in the difference is the way the startups communicate. I'm coaching chemical companies. I'm coaching cosmetic company, but companies that build cell phones, tools, connectivity tools, whatever it is. And the way they communicate is completely different, and the way they show, and they should show customers or stakeholders or whoever they want to talk, is completely different. What I see today is that blockchain startups, as we were mentioning before, are very focused on technology. And the technology is good, but when they need to speak with somebody else, then they need to be a little bit driven towards having a simpler or simplified communication method with the outside world. So it's easy to sell a cell phone, or let's say it's easier to communicate what the product is. With the blockchain startups, it's a little bit more difficult. And that's where our mentoring, I think our mentoring added value is to drive the startup in thinking and speaking in a simpler way to the customers or to the
people. I generally agree with what Valerio said. In my experience, the prime difference is kind of helping the startups to create this legitimacy of why they're using blockchain, and kind of really dealing with the stigma, negative understanding of a lot of people about what blockchain is and its association with Bitcoin and all the things that come with it. But in terms of what I communicate to the startups or the types of questions that they ask, I don't necessarily see a massive divergence from the normal startups. Valerio, you're absolutely correct to point out that the communication that they have to take on is somehow different, because they have to focus on other particular aspects of the technology per se, or sometimes they focus too much on the technology per se. Then maybe they should focus more on the value that you're creating, because the technology at the end of the process is a moot issue. A lot of people don't care about the technology which is behind something, so long as you provide the trust or immutability or decentralization and what have you, done with other technologies, that's also fine for a lot of people. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I don't see a lot of differences, but so the differences are kind of minute in my understanding.
Okay, Jerry, do you want to finish?
Yeah, sure. I'll finish. I think the reason why these programs exist is because we're still in that first phase of calling it blockchain startups, while really they will become startups that happen to use blockchain. Is what Valerio and Yasha already pointed out. So trying to get away from that is something that mentoring sometimes needs to do. Secondly, especially there's the business model issue. Sometimes if you're more into that decentralization world, then the business model of, say, token economies and all that kind of stuff can be slightly different than typical business models. So, and there's tools for that as well. And the third one is that the problem it fixes sometimes is around trust, and that is a slightly more complex area than that startups with other technologies try to fix, and that comes with slightly different questions. But the bottom line is same thing. What's your unique selling proposition or your value proposition? What's the problem that you fix for what market? And that always is more or less the same.
Yeah, and sometimes the difference is because not everybody is aware of what blockchain is, and it's hard to get into a customer or stakeholder trying to explain the technology itself. So I think at some moments we have to only explore some details to have customers on board or stakeholders on board. The differences are not that many. It's a company. At the end, the outcome needs to be profit, and the shareholders are the ones that we need to please at the end. So it doesn't only the questions are slightly different, like Jerry and Yasha said. So do you want to have any other comments, Valerio?
No.
And Yasha?
That would be all. Thank you.
Okay. And Jerry?
No, if there's any more questions, then feel free to reach out. I think the contact details are somewhere, somehow. So to all the startups, use us.
And I don't know if like the slides, I mean, there was one page, but anybody if wanted to have access to that slide, please, I don't know, through Blockpool or any other way that you could find to contact me and us, I guess, just feel free to do so.
Okay, I would say the same. If you find you need to talk with me or discuss some topics, feel free to contact the program, and I'm here to help you as much as I can. So, if no other question arose, then we can finish the panel and